When Viking longships appeared on the horizon, the monks and nuns knew terror, but they could not imagine the specific, protracted horror awaiting those taken alive. The year is 793. On the tidal island of Lindisfarne, a holy silence blankets the monastery of St. Cuthbert. This community is one of the great lights of early Christian Britain, a center of art, learning, and profound devotion. Here, monks and nuns spend their days in rhythmic harmony, prayer, meditation, and the meticulous copying of sacred texts in the scriptorium, their hands creating illuminated masterpieces. For over 150 years, this has been a sanctuary. But on this June morning, the rhythm of the sea brings a different sound. Look to the water. Dark shapes resolve into dragon-headed longships, their prows carving through the waves with terrifying purpose. These are not merchants. They are the drakkar, vessels of war, each carrying a crew of hardened Norse warriors. For the defenseless monastic community, the world is about to fracture. They have no army, no battlements, only faith and fragile walls. The Vikings storm ashore. What follows is not a battle, but a brutal harvesting. Fire and smoke stain the sky. The chapel's peace is shattered by shouts in a foreign tongue, the clash of metal, and the cries of the fallen. Reliquaries of gold, silver chalices, jeweled gospel covers, generations of pious offerings are ripped from their altars. Those who resist are cut down. The elderly and infirm are left to perish. But many are not killed. The Vikings are pragmatic. The young, the able-bodied monks, scribes, and nuns are bound with coarse rope and dragged towards the beaches. Their fate? To be traded as human currency in the vast Norse economic machine. This is the forgotten story of what happened next, a journey into a darkness far longer than the raid itself. Today, we will trace the harrowing path of these monastic captives from the smoldering ruins of their home to the slave markets of the north, and into the alien households of their captors. We will uncover the precise mechanics of Norse slavery, a system where people were pure property. And we will grapple with the particular torment faced by consecrated women, nuns who had sworn vows to God, now thrust into a world that profaned every single one. What does it mean to lose not just your freedom, but your very purpose? To comprehend the scale of this horror, we must first understand the engine driving it, the Viking Age expansion. Beginning in the late 8th century, Scandinavians erupted from their fjords and forests. A combination of factors propelled them: technological mastery of the seas, population pressures, internal power struggles, and a cultural ethos that celebrated the acquisition of wealth and status through martial prowess. Raiding was not a shadowy activity. It was a respected career path for ambitious young men. And for these raiders, Christian monasteries glimmered on the coastline like unlocked treasuries. Consider the target. Monasteries were often fabulously wealthy, accumulating precious metals and stones as devotional objects. To Viking eyes, a gem-studded crucifix was not a holy symbol, but a unit of bullion, ready to be melted or traded. Their locations were strategically vulnerable, isolated for contemplation, yet accessible by water, the Viking highway. And crucially, their inhabitants were ideologically disarmed. Monks and nuns were Militas Christi, soldiers of Christ, whose weapons were prayer and penance, not sword and shield. They were, in the coldest terms, soft targets brimming with hard wealth. The raid on Lindisfarne was not an anomaly. It was a blueprint. The shock it sent through Christendom was seismic. In distant courts, scholars heard the news with apocalyptic dread. Alcuin of York, an advisor to Charlemagne, wrote anguished letters. "Never before has such terror appeared in Britain," he declared, seeing it as a sign of divine wrath. For the European psyche, this was more than a crime. It was a desecration that threatened the moral order. But for the captives shivering on those ships, theology was the last thing on their minds. Survival was now a raw, physical calculus. As the coastline of their homeland faded behind them, they entered the brutal reality of the Norse slave economy. To see their future, we must dismantle the social structure of the Viking world. It was a hierarchy of three broad classes. At the top, the jarls, the aristocracy, and warlords. Below them, the carls, the free farmers and craftsmen who formed society's backbone, and at the bottom, the thralls. The thrall was not a servant. A thrall was a living tool, a piece of property with no more legal rights than a goat or an axe. They could be bought, sold, gambled away, or gifted. Their children were born into slavery. Their bodies were not their own. Captives from raids were the primary source of this human stock. Major trading hubs became bustling slave markets. Imagine the scene in Hedeby or Dublin. A bewildered monk from Northumbria, a nun from Ireland, stripped their robes, examined for muscle and teeth, and auctioned to the highest bidder. Their price varied. A strong young man could fetch the equivalent of several cows. A young woman, her value was assessed differently, tied to both labor and reproductive capacity. This was the cold commercial reality. Now, step into the mind of a captured nun. Yesterday, her identity was bride of Christ. Her day was ordered by the canonical hours, lauds, prime, vespers. Her work was spiritual. Prayer, copying scripture, tending the sacred flame. Today she is RLL. Her world shrinks to the creak of a longship, the smell of salt and sweat, the feel of rough hemp on her wrists. Her Latin prayers are meaningless sounds to her captors. Her vow of poverty is a cruel joke. She owns nothing, not even herself. Her vow of obedience is violently transferred to a pagan master. And her vow of chastity, that vow becomes a site of profound, systematic violation. Her body, once a vessel for prayer, was now a territory to be conquered. In the Norse household, a female thrall's duties were dual and relentless. By day, she was a beast of burden. She would grind grain for hours on a cornstone, her back aching. She would haul water, tend livestock, cook over open fires, weave cloth until her fingers were numb. By night, she had no sanctuary. Norse law and custom granted masters sexual access to their enslaved women. The Icelandic Gragas laws later codified this, stating children born of such unions could be acknowledged as free, incentivizing exploitation through a promise of legacy. For a woman who had dedicated her virginity to God, this was not just rape, though it was certainly that. It was a spiritual annihilation, a deep defilement of her most sacred promise. She was forced to bear children who might be free, yet whose existence was a permanent testament to her violation. Resistance was futile and punished with terrifying brutality. Escape? The geography itself was a prison. To flee into the Scandinavian wilderness or a foreign port was a death sentence. She was utterly trapped, a soul in exile within her own skin. But human stories are never monolithic. The archaeological record whispers tales of astonishing complexity. Consider the genetic evidence from Iceland. Studies of mitochondrial DNA passed down the maternal line reveal a striking fact. A majority of the founding women were of Gaelic origin, from the British Isles. These were the captives, the taken. They arrived in chains, but their genetic legacy became the fabric of a new nation. Some undoubtedly lived and died in brutal servitude. Others, perhaps through a change in fortune, their master's death, or sheer force of will, found a form of integration. They may have become concubines who gained informal influence, or even wives in settlements where women were scarce. Their children, raised in Norse culture, would sing songs of Valkyries, not psalms, yet they carried their mother's blood. This integration was a form of survival, but it came at the cost of profound cultural and personal erasure. We see faint echoes in the sagas, written centuries later, which sometimes mention a foreign woman in a hero's ancestry, her origin story left tactfully vague. Yet, we must guard against seeing this as a redemption narrative. For every woman whose lineage survived, countless others left no trace. Their bodies were broken by labor, their spirits extinguished by despair. Their graves are anonymous, often marked only by a simple stone, if at all, placed far from the honored dead. How do we measure the cost of an age, if not in these silent, unnamed losses? The institution of slavery was the dark foundation of early Norse prosperity. A thriving farm required thralls. A chieftain status was displayed by the number of humans he owned. The psychological impact on the enslaved was a deliberate tool of control. Breaking their old identity was the first step. A monk might be forced to perform work that defiled his sacred skills, using holy vellum to patch a sail, perhaps. A nun might be ordered to prepare food for a pagan blot, a sacrifice to Odin or Thor. Each act was a small ritual of subjugation, reinforcing their new reality. You are no longer who you were. You are ours. And death offered no certain refuge. The accounts of Ibn Fadlan, an Arab diplomat who witnessed a Viking funeral on the Volga, are chilling. A slave girl was ritually killed to accompany her chieftain master into the afterlife, an honor in their view, a murder in ours. Archaeology confirms this practice. Graves show slaves buried as accessories, sometimes with signs of violent trauma, beheading, or strangulation. In death, as in life, they were property, disposable and extensions of their master's will. Back in the traumatized Christian world, chroniclers struggled to process these events. The martyrs were easy to venerate, those who died defending the altar. But what theological category existed for the stolen, the violated, the enslaved? A painful debate ensued. Were nuns who had been defiled still pure in the eyes of God? Church fathers largely concluded they were, that consent was the key to sin, and these women were blameless victims. They were framed as white martyrs, suffering a long, drawn-out witness for Christ far from home. This was a doctrinal mercy, but it could not heal their wounds. Their suffering became a potent symbol in monastic writings, a stark reminder of the world's savage edge. They prayed in silence, their hymns replaced by the sounds of their new world, the grindstone, the loom, the foreign tongue of command. The legacy of this trauma reshaped Europe. The famous prayer, A furor normanorum libera nos, Domini, from the fury of the Northmen, deliver us, O Lord, entered the liturgy. It was a cry of collective terror. Monastic architecture changed. Low, vulnerable wooden buildings gave way to stone towers and fortified walls. The very design of religious life incorporated a new element: fear. Kings began to organize coastal defenses, the first seeds of national navies. The Viking raids, in their horrific way, forced a militarization of the Christian landscape. But time weaves strange patterns. The same Vikings who raided began to settle. They established kingdoms in York and Dublin, carved out Normandy in France. As they put down roots, they began to change. Contact with the cultures they once plundered, including the silent, persistent influence of their own Christian captives, started to soften their world. A slave woman whispering the Lord's Prayer to her child, a captured monk using his literacy to help a chieftain track trade goods. These were subtle acts of cultural transmission. Slowly, over centuries, the cross replaced the hammer. Kings like Harald Bluetooth of Denmark embraced Christianity, partly for political unity with mainland Europe. The predators gradually joined the flock they had once preyed upon. This transformation, however, does not retroactively absolve the brutality. The Viking Age was built on a foundation of organized violence and human trafficking. The romanticized image of the noble explorer-adventurer must coexist with the reality of the slave master. When we walk the serene ruins of Lindisfarne today, we stand on a palimpsest of history. The grass grows over stone foundations. The sea is calm. It is a place of profound peace. But we must listen harder. In the wind, there is an echo of a scream. In the silence between waves, the ghost of a sob. This is where history's deepest truths reside, not in the grand narratives of kings and battles, but in the intimate, shattered lives of the powerless. Can we ever truly hear them? The story of the monastic captives is ultimately a story about the value of a human being. In their old world, their value was spiritual, infinite. In their new world, their value was economic, measured in silver or labor. Their journey forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Civilization is terrifyingly thin. It can be scraped away in a single morning by men in long ships. Yet, in their enduring, in the sheer fact that they had to wake each day and continue, they performed the most fundamental act of resistance. They existed. They carried within them an inner world, of memory, of faith, of a self that could not be wholly owned, that no captor could ever reach. That inner light, flickering in the darkness of foreign homesteads and distant markets, is perhaps their ultimate legacy. It is a testament to the human spirit's stubborn refusal to be entirely extinguished, even under the most crushing weight of brutality. If this journey into the shadows of history held meaning for you, please give this video a like. It profoundly helps our channel Winds of Thought as we work to bring these lost echoes of the human experience back into the light.